بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. To continue inshallah with al-Muhadhab min Ihya'i Ulum al-Din by Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala wa radi'an. And we stopped last week. We mentioned some of the parts of the body that should be cleaned. So he says al-fadalat al-dhahira naw'an, that that which is considered to be excessive of the body and requires removal from the body are two types. The first, awsakh, the second, ajza. So we started with the awsakh. Al-awwal, we said ما يجتمع أو ما يجتمع في شعر الرأس, that which collects in hair, especially if a person has long hair and so on and so forth. ما يجتمع من الوسخ في معاطف الأذن, that which collects in the parts of the ear which are apparent. And he did mention the inside of the ear should be cleaned likewise. And he mentioned the hammam, so the public baths or the Turkish baths. And then he says, ما يجتمع داخل الأنف, that which collects in one's nose, nostrils. ما يجتمع على الأسنان وطرف اللسان, that which collects upon one's teeth and tongue. And of course, alhamdulillah, we have very easy access to that which cleans all of these things today. Tissue, tooth brushes, the buds, etc., or cotton swabs, and so on and so forth. الخامس ما يجتمع في اللحية من الوسخ إذا لم يتعهد, and we spoke about this in slight detail, that which collects in a person's beard if they don't take care of the beard. And we spoke about presentation and the importance of presentation, especially for those that are diplomats of Islam. And to some extent, in our circumstance here, in our situation here, every single one of us, we are diplomats of Islam. We are representatives of Islam. When the Muslim does something, they are seen as a Muslim doing something. When a non-Muslim does something, they're not seen as representative of that which they are affiliated to of religion and faith. Why? Because they are the majority. We here are a minority. And likewise, the Sahaba, initially, they were a minority. And so it's very important that we are aware of our identity and the impact our actions will have upon our identity. And the impact our actions will have upon the way Islam is perceived by others, by non-Muslims. And he mentions that a person should take care of their presentation when he spoke about the beard, to the extent that it won't scare people away. A person will not scare others away with their appearance. And this is Imam al-Ghazali speaking, 1,000 years ago, roughly, in a majority Muslim land, where Islam was in a very powerful position globally, and continued to be so for a lot longer after his death. And so if that was the case in his time, then what about in our time today? He says, Asadisu, so this is where we came to, this is where we stopped basically. Asadisu wasakhul barajum. So where he says, وهي معاطف ظهور الأنامل فقد أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بغسل البراجم. So basically, in brief, to wash the parts of the hands and the fingers that may allow for dirt and filth to collect. So around the nails, in the skin, there might be parts that are folded and so on and so forth. Any part of the hands or the outer appearance that can allow for the collection of dirt should be washed, and attention should be paid. And that would include, the eyes, parts of the face, etc. But again, we live in a society, in comparison to previous societies and civilizations, we would be considered somewhat excessive in our cleaning habits. Not to say that they're not correct, but if we were to compare ourselves to the societies that came before us, perhaps we would be considered somewhat excessive. Why? Because we have access to water and cleaning products in a way that previous civilizations and nations and groups did not. And so perhaps if they did, they would clean in the way that we clean, etc. Having a bath or a shower daily, washing hair daily, cleaning our face with soap and products 3-4 times a day for some, etc. This wasn't practical. It wasn't something that a person would be able to do. If you're out in the field, if you're in a desert, in a farmland, etc. Only now do we have plumbing that can send water all the way to you, miles away from a water source. Previously, if there was no water source, or there was no small amount of water being carried, there was no water that you had. There was nothing you could use to clean. And if you were carrying water and you were going on a journey far away from an actual water source, that water would be spared for drinking. And alhamdulillah, the wudu. So the wudu is a form of cleaning, and that places emphasis on being clean, etc. But the cleanliness that we have in our time, where we have products and processes to remove filth and perhaps stubborn filth, grease and things like this, wasn't accessible to nations that came before us the way it's accessible to us today. So that's something to take into consideration. And Imam al-Ghazali, he does in fact speak about this point in the original Ihya. He speaks about how the fuqaha became overly excessive in cleanliness, to the extent that went beyond the cleanliness of the Sahaba, that which was deemed and seen as necessary. السادس وسخ البراجم, so we mentioned that. السابع تنظيف الرواجب. أمر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم العرب بتنظيفها وهي رؤوس الأنامل وما تحت الأظافر من الوسخ لأنها كانت لا يحضرها المقراض في كل وقت فتجتمع فيها أوساخ. So he says the seventh part of the body that we have to clean is basically the nails and that which collects underneath the nails. And he says the Prophet ﷺ, he ordered the al-Araba, the Arabs, to do so. Why? Because they didn't have with them at all times that which they were able to use to trim their nails. Therefore, dirt would naturally collect between the nails. If you're riding, if you're traveling, if you're active, if you're working out on the field, if you're working in a laborious job, etc., naturally you're going to collect dirt upon your fingers, and if your nails are long, then you're going to collect underneath the nails. And of course, we're going to speak about the cutting of the nails. He says, لأنها كانت لا يحضرها أو لا يحضرها المقراض في كل وقت فتجتمع فيها أوساخ فوقت لهم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قلم الأظافر ونتف الإبط وحلق العانة 40 يوما. So the Prophet ﷺ, due to this, the Prophet ﷺ specified a period of time wherein a person should not allow themselves to go beyond when it comes to trimming the nails. And not, so we're going to talk about this, but ridding oneself of hair that grows beneath the armpits and pubic hair. So he says, قلم الأظافر, so basically trimming the nails. وَنَطْفَ الْإِبْطِ, and نطف الإبط is not to trim, but to pull. So pulling the hair from one's armpits. Yeah, and he's going to speak about it in a little bit of detail shortly, inshallah. وَحَلْقَ الْعَانَةِ, and trimming or shaving, ridding oneself of the hair in their pubic region. So the Prophet ﷺ basically mentioned that a person should not go beyond 40 days without doing so. It's not permissible for a person to allow their nails to grow beyond 40 days, nor should they allow themselves to have hair beneath their armpits which has grown for more than 40 days, likewise the pubic region, etc. Then he says, الثامن الدرن الذي يجتمع على جميع البدن برشح العرق وغبار الطريق وذلك يزيله الحمام. So the eighth is the filth or the dirt that may collect upon a person's body due to sweat and that which they encounter, the elements that they come into contact with outside whilst they're traveling on the roadside and so on and so forth. So a person should clean their body of these things. Again, for us, we don't even take this into consideration. Why? We jump in the shower and jump out of the shower and we rid ourselves of these things. But previously, water was not as accessible. It wasn't possible to jump in beneath something that sprays or shoots water at you for 5 minutes and jump out and you're clean. It was a longer process than that, collecting the water. If the water was freezing cold, warming the water up slightly, finding a place to wash yourself where others couldn't see, and so on and so forth. And then he says, وَذَلِكَ يُزِيلُهُ الْحَمَّامِ. So the hammam rids oneself of these things. And he says, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِدُخُولِ الْحَمَّامِ. So he's going to speak about entering into Turkish baths, public baths. So why would he even consider this issue? Why would he ask the question? In posing the answer, he's asking the question, is it permissible to use a Turkish bath? Why would he discuss this issue? So free mixing, awrah, etc. And he's telling us that there was a difference of opinion amongst the ulama, amongst some of the Sahaba even perhaps. So he says, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِدُخُولِ الْحَمَّامِ وَقَدْ دَخَلَ بَعْضُ أَصْحَابِ النَّبِيِّ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ حَمَّامَاتِ الشَّامِ. Some of the Sahaba, they used the hammamat that were built in Sham, in the region which is Syria, maybe a part of Jordan, a part of Iraq, Palestine, etc. وقال بعضهم نعم البيت بيت الحمام يطهر البدن ويذكر الناس. ويذكر النار. So he mentioned that some of the Sahaba, it's known, it's attributed to them that they said that this bayt, i.e. the Baytul Hammam, the place of the Turkish bath, public house of bathing, whatever you want to call it, it's a blessing, a great place. Why? It cleans the body and it reminds a person of an-nar, the akhirah. How so? The heat, the temperature. When a person enters into a sauna or a steam room, the heat, imagine that heat intensified by times that we can't imagine. And this was the way of the Sahaba. Everything in the dunya would remind them of the akhirah. They would use the dunya to remind themselves of the akhirah. Likewise, that's how we should approach things. We should try to remind ourselves of the akhirah through that which we come into contact with in the dunya. And remind ourselves we're only here for a short period of time. Then he says, وَقَالَ بَعْضُهُمْ بِئْسَ الْبَيْتِ بَيْتُ الْحَمَّامِ يُبْدِ الْعَوْرَةِ وَيُذْهِبُ الْحَيَاءِ. He also mentioned that some of the Sahaba, they said that this place, it's a wicked place. A wicked place. Why? It leads to the revealing of the awrah, and it leads to a person losing their haya. A person leaves off their clothing, reveals their awrah, and loses their haya in the process. The first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, until they become desensitized to their own awrah being exposed and the awrat of others. And then he says, فَهَذَا تَعَرَّضَ لِآفَاتِهِ وَذَاكَ تَعَرَّضَ لِفَائِدَتِهِ. So the latter acknowledged the potential vices of the hammam, and the former acknowledged the benefits. So now Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he gives us a principle which can be applied in multiple areas. He says, وَلَا بَأْسَ بِطَلَبِ فَائِدَتِهِ عِنْدَ الْإِحْتِرَازِ عَنْ أو مِنْ آفَاتِهِ. He says there is no problem in a person seeking out its benefits so long as they are able to protect themselves, stay away from its harms and vices. So if a person, as was mentioned earlier, goes to a public sauna, someone may ask, is it permissible to go to a public sauna? Is it permissible to go to a public steam room? What would the answer be? Anyone?
As long as you can protect yourself from the harm.
Exactly. So first, you have to identify what are the potential vices. Are there any potential vices to going to the public sauna, public steam room? If it's a free mixing one, then no. Why? Because I'm going to be exposed to the awrah of women, number one, for men, and men for women. If it's one wherein the men are not covering properly, and as a man, I'm going there, again, it wouldn't be permissible. And this is sometimes a misunderstanding that some have, that it's okay to see the awrah of another man, or for a woman to see the awrah of another woman, etc. That's not the case. I'm not permitted to look at the awrah of another man And I shouldn't present myself in places where I may be exposed to the aura of another man. So if I'm going to go to a public bathhouse, steam room, sauna, and there's a possibility that there's going to be free mixing there, there's going to be naked people there, etc., I should try to avoid it. If I can avoid those things and I can benefit from its usage, then alhamdulillah. So likewise, working out, going to the gym, for example. If I can go to the gym and I can avoid the issue of seeing the opposite gender naked, my own gender naked, and I am not exposing myself in that manner likewise, then alhamdulillah, I can go. But if I'm going to be exposed to that which I shouldn't be exposing myself to, then I should stay away from it. And this is a general principle the fuqaha, they speak about. To varying degrees, some of the fuqaha, they'll say that it's not permissible to go to a place where you are presenting yourself for haram, except if there's a necessity. And if there's a necessity, you're allowed to go there, based upon the necessity itself, and so on and so forth. These types of discussions, they take place amongst the scholars of usul, the philosophy of Islamic law. So then he says, النوع الثاني. So now we've covered the first type of dirt, filth that's to be removed from the body. That's the first category. The second category, that which is considered to be excessive and should be removed from the body. He says, ما يحدث في البدن من الأجزاء. So that which comes from the body and should be removed from the body, basically. وهي ثمانية. So he mentions there are 8. And perhaps we won't cover all 8 this evening. الأول شعر الرأس. So the first, hair of the head. He says, ولا بأس بحلقه لمن أراد التنظيف. There is no harm for a man to shave his head if he wants to keep a clean head. He wants to keep a clean head, it's easier just to shave it all off, his hair. ولا بأس بتركه لمن يدهنه ويرجله. And there's no harm in keeping hair as long as the person is going to take care of it, oil it and brush it, etc. But if a person has long hair and they're just leaving it, all over the place, not taking care of it, not oiling it, not brushing it, etc., that's not considered to be from the etiquettes of Islam. It's not considered to be from the etiquettes of Islam. And it's attributed to Imam Ahmad that he said he would have kept long hair if it had not been for the difficulty in keeping it, i.e. looking after it. Because he felt that having long hair, it has a haqq upon him. If you have long hair, you have to take care of it, oiling it, brushing it, making sure it looks presentable, etc. And so he chose not to for that reason. And then he says, الثاني شعر الشارب وقد قال عليه الصلاة والسلام حف الشوارب وعفوا اللحى أي اجعلوها حفاف الشفا. So he mentioned the second type of excess from the body that we should remove is the moustache. So removing the moustache, he says, the Prophet ﷺ said, حَفُّ الشَّوَارِبَ وَعْفُ اللِّحَى, to basically remove the moustache and keep a beard. And so we're going to look at what does that mean. He says, al-Ghazali أي اجعلوها حفاف الشفا. So basically, keep your moustache to a level where it is close to the level of your lips. So not, a massive kind of, I don't know what to call it, but if you look at the style in the 70s and the 80s, the Arab tash, the epic tash. So not to have an epic tash without a beard, but to have a beard which is a similar level to your lips. He says, حولها, so around the lips. وفي لفظ آخر احفو, in another variation of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he used a different expression of the same word. وهذا يشعر بالاستئصال. And this particular expression, احفو, basically gives the impression that you should remove it completely. He says, وقوله حفو يدل على ما دون ذلك. And as for the expression that was used in the first variation that we mentioned, it gives an indication that you should take away but leave some of it, i.e. lower it. Don't take it completely off, but keep it relevant to the the level of your lips. When I say level, I mean surface level. It doesn't mean if a person has, no lips, they should have no moustache, etc. No, meaning, close to the level of your face. He says, وأما الحلق فلم يرد والإحفاء القريب من الحلق نقل عن الصحابة. So as for completely taking it off, as in completely having no moustache, it hasn't been mentioned by any of the ulama that came before Imam al-Ghazali, nor has it been attributed to any of the Sahaba. And as for that which is close to shaving, so maybe like a level 1, then it's been attributed to some of the Sahaba. Yeah, so for some, the opposite took place. It was the epic tash with no beard. But it should be a beard of some type and a moderate moustache. As for the beard, he doesn't go into it. Excuse me. In the Muhadhab, perhaps he touches on it in more detail. In the original, I can't remember. But we touched on it last week, where he says a person should keep it neat. A person should keep it neat and presentable. Yeah, so to keep it trimmed and neat. It shouldn't be all over the place. And that's the opinion of Imam al-Ghazali. And there are different opinions you'll find amongst the fuqaha. Generally, depending on who you ask in the Hanafi school of fiqh. So some of the Ahnaf, they believe that it can be trimmed, and it goes back to the customs, the urf. And others from the Ahnaf, they believe that no, you should leave it, perhaps trim it, but it should be large. The Shafi'iyah, they say that as long as you have that which is considered to be a beard, it's okay. The Hanabila, they say as long as it's a fist length, and there's a difference of opinion on what does a fist length actually mean. So some would say grabbing it, some would say by doing this. And the Malikiyah, Allahu A'lam, I don't know. You would have to ask someone from the Malikiyah. And then he says, الثالث شعر الإبط. So we said we were going to touch upon this in more detail later on. The hair that grows beneath one's armpits. ويستحب ندفه كل 40 يوما وذلك سهل على من تعود ومن تعود الحلق فيكفيه. So he says that a person should actually pluck or pull the hair from their armpits. Pluck or pull. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he used that particular word. And he says it's easy for the one who has become used to doing so. And as for the one that's become used to shaving, then he can suffice himself with the blade, shaving. Has anyone tried it? No? I'll ask again in a few weeks, inshallah. He says, الرابع شعر العانة ويستحب إزالته إما بالحلق أو بالنورة في المدة المتقدمة. So he says the fourth is to remove pubic hair, and it's recommended to remove it completely, either by shaving or by, they used to use something which is referred to as a nura, which is basically like, a natural paste that removes of various ingredients, that removes hair. And alhamdulillah, it's pretty much common knowledge, but so it's very important that we teach this to the younger generation. Removing pubic hair and removing hair that grows beneath the armpits, etc. Likewise, hair on our face, presentation-wise, for men, we should look presentable. And the purpose behind it is cleanliness. It's for cleanliness reasons. الخامس الأظافر وتقليمها مستحب لشناعة صورتها إذا طالت ولما يجتمع فيها من الوسخ. So likewise, or لما يجتمع فيها من الوسخ. So likewise, the nails, we should be clipping them, clipping our nails, trimming our nails. And the reason for this is because it looks, he says, شناعة صورتها. It looks basically, you could say perhaps, grotesque when a person grows them. When a person grows their nails, it doesn't look nice at all. And likewise, it's very unhygienic. And today we know that, germs, bacteria, infections, etc., grow or they can collect beneath the nails and grow. So it's very important that we trim our nails, and that means nails of the hand or hands and nails of the feet. The nails of the toes are just as important as the nails of the hands, especially for those that are going to perform Umrah. Why? Because it's not fair if you're performing tawaf and you're stabbing people in the back of their heels. And that happens. You're praying and you go into ruku' and someone's growing their nails. It's not correct. We should look presentable and clean at the same time. And we have no excuse. We don't go on 7-month journeys, generally speaking, most of us. And even if we do, we have now a magical instrument called a nail clipper. You can put it in your pocket, in your bag, etc. And it's very accessible. And another point on this, a person should not be clipping nails, nor should they be peeling nails in the masjid. In the masjid. You don't want to go into sujood and you find someone's left a lovely nail there. It's not correct. It's basic adab, basic etiquettes. And generally speaking, I would suggest that someone doesn't clip their nails in front of other people. Do it in a private area, in the bathroom, for example, not in front of other people. Cleaning ourselves, removing that which is considered to be excessive from our bodies. Generally, a general rule, it shouldn't be done in front of other people. It's to be considered private. So a person should go to the bathroom. And we might smile and laugh, but sometimes these things people do in front of other people. And Islam came to change us, came to rectify us, came to educate us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to it, sibghatullah, the sibgha, the tanning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the dye of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you dye leather, the dye, it permeates through. So the entire piece of leather becomes the color of the dye. If you cut through the leather, the leather will be colored all the way through. That's what Islam should do. Islam changes us internally and externally. So that if you could imagine, cutting through, you would see Islam all the way through all of our behavior, from the way that we use the bathroom to the way that we eat. You can tell if a Muslim owns a restaurant or a shop because you go into the bathroom, what do you find? A jug. Is that not the case? Why? Because it's from the etiquettes, the adab of Islam. Here anyway. Of course, there are non-Muslim countries that use water, and alhamdulillah, it's a blessing. But Islam, a person can be seen as a Muslim and should be seen as a Muslim before they are heard as a Muslim. So it's important to focus on not only the ibadat, but the adab, the etiquettes, the adab. And there are adab when it comes to the way we present ourselves. There are adab, the way that we conduct ourselves. Adab, the way that we speak to each other, the way that we receive speech from each other, and so on. And he's actually going to mention the beard shortly, inshallah. He says, مَا طَالَ مِنَ اللَّحْيَةِ. So we'll leave that, inshallah, for next week, because the al-Muhaddib, he actually left quite a lot of it in here. And we'll conclude with that, inshallah, for this evening.